going to leave practical change. You want revival, but you want revival that reforms. You want religious excitement. It's good to get excitement, but you want religious excitement that when it's over, and it will be over, we can't remain excited forever. Okay, I'm sorry. Maybe in heaven, all right? That when the excitement subsides, there's fruit that remains. Fruit in terms of transformed lives, changed environment, a society that more reflects the lordship of Jesus, more justice, more goodness, more love in the community rather than less. Okay, so he said, take heed that no one deceives you. There's also perhaps another more serious deception, and that is this. As this message of Israel goes out, and more people, Christian people in the church around the world, become awakened to the significance of being connected to our Hebrew roots, because that's what God is doing, and that's what the scriptures say. This is a message that is destined to roll across the church until everyone who is Christian is somehow going to be impacted by this. I believe that we're still just in the very beginning stages of this. The church after church, denomination after denomination, I believe that we're going to see an awakening to the significance of Israel, the prophetic significance of Israel, and this message is going to continue to grow, not only here in Malaysia, but in other parts of the world. One of the dangers of this message, and I believe Pastor Stephen talked about it, is a romantic love that says everything about Israel is good and it's from God. You know, we want the church, we want all Christians to come out of this sad and terribly long history of Christian contempt for Jewish things. All right, and you know, the Western church in particular has held these beliefs for centuries. And has considered the Jews outcasts and killers of Christ, and I spoke about that earlier. We want the church all over the world, particularly the new churches here in Asia and in Africa and other places, to not only come out, but never even start that negative attitude towards Jewish things. So we want Christians to love Israel, and we want Christians to love the Jewish people. But what I believe God wants is a realistic love, and not just a romantic love. Loving Israel doesn't mean, wearing certain clothes or blowing the shofar. You can do those things, and you can reclaim those things. You can redeem those things for the purpose of the Lord. But loving Israel realistically means understanding that the people of Israel mostly are unsaved today. And when we say stand with Israel, we don't mean we want you to give blanket approval to every decision made by the Israeli government. I mean, we live in Israel. We don't agree with every decision of the Israeli government. Because, as far as I know, we don't have one Messianic Jew in the government. They're unsaved. In many ways, they're in darkness. Some of them are just outright deceived. And so they need our prayers. Nevertheless, God is going to work through them. The heart of Israel is partially hardened until the fullness of the Gentiles will come in. And all Israel will be saved. We're moving in that direction. But what we want is a realistic love. And in our realistic love, be aware of this one thing. There are many things that Israel was commanded to do in the laws that God gave Moses on Mount Sinai. I mean, there's laws about the Sabbath. There's laws about the holidays. There's laws about the Jubilee. There's laws about foods. There's laws about clothing. 613 commandments in the laws that were given to Israel. I believe that Christians need to know those commandments. We need to go back and read them. We need to understand them. But I believe God wants a comprehensive interpretation in the spirit of those laws based on the understanding that Jesus himself fulfills them. He is the spirit of all of those laws. Now, if you really want to understand Jesus, go back and read those laws, and you'll know what he is, because he came to fulfill those laws. They find their perfection in him. And so he leads us into the spirit of the lawful nature of God. But if you take some aspect of those laws and try to apply it to your life, you get to be on a slippery slope. What do I mean by that? Let's say there's someone who comes in and says, you know what? All you have to do is rest on God's Sabbath. It's one of the 10 commandments. And the Sabbath begins Friday night and then ends Saturday night. And, you should do, and what God commanded is you should do no work whatsoever. If you really want to please God, do that. It's in the 10 commandments. It's in the prophets. Even many of the Jews in the New Testament observe the Sabbath, and so should you. Be really careful about that. This happened to the Galatian church, and in the New Testament times, there were believers in Galatia. False teachers were coming in, and they were saying, you Galatians, you want to follow Jesus? Well, you need to be circumcised. Because Jesus was circumcised, and, all of his disciples were, so should you. And you know what Paul wrote to the Galatians? You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Don't you realize if you take one aspect of the law, you need to come under all of the law? You've been set free. Stand fast in the liberty wherewith Christ has set you free. Realize he is the fulfillment of those things. He'll teach you the spirit of those laws, how to be circumcised in your heart, how to enter the rest of God by faith and have the spirit of the Sabbath. These are the things we need to apply ourselves to. But if you pick and choose, or you listen to teachers who tell you to pick this aspect of the law and try to apply it, you start getting on this slippery slope. There's an end to this, and I need to warn you because this is very, very serious. There are some Christians today who started out with a great zeal for Israel and developed this, what I would call a romantic love, and it went to adopting aspects of the law, and at a certain point, some of them, certainly not all, a tiny minority, but I would say every Messianic leader like myself in Israel today, we know someone who's done this. They take some aspect of the law, and then it's another aspect of the law. And pretty soon they say, well, what am I doing this Christian thing for? What do I need Jesus for? I've got the law, like the Jews. And some of them will at that point convert to Judaism. And some of them, even at that point, become the enemies of Jesus. I personally know people like that. So I would say, beware, stand fast in the liberty. We have so much to learn from Israel. We have to get connected to our Hebraic roots. This is where the strength and the nourishment and the ability to bear fruit. We need to go back and read the Bible that Jesus carried, which didn't contain the New Testament. Okay? We need to know the laws of God, but we also need to understand how to interpret those laws in the Spirit and walk in the Spirit. If you have any questions about how to walk in the spirit of a law, just look to Jesus. Look to Jesus. Jesus healed, for example. Jesus, boy, I really got myself into this, so I'm going to have to explain. Okay, what do I mean by the spirit of the law and looking to Jesus? Okay, the law commands Sabbath, right? 24 hours, you will do no work. The penalty to break that was death under the laws of Moses. So then Jesus comes along. Is he going to break that law? Now, think about this. Where was Jesus when God gave those laws to Moses on Mount Sinai? Where was Jesus when God was speaking to Moses on Sinai? Well, our Bible says he has been in the Father forever. Forever. His own testimony, he said, I and the Father are one. Okay? He's the eternal Son. He's always been one with the Father. He always will be one with the Father. There's no difference. There's no shadow of turning. There's no separation between Jesus and the Father. So you can say, well, Jesus was there. He and the Father gave the Spirit and gave the law to Moses on Sinai. Okay, so now in his earthly ministry, when Jesus is ministering, and we read about it in the New Testament, is he going to break the laws that God gave to Moses on Sinai? Heaven forbid. Why should Jesus break any of the laws that were given? He gave them. Okay, so now you have to answer the question. So is he breaking the law as he was accused of doing when he heals people on the Sabbath? Right? He would walk into the synagogue knowing that the Pharisees would accuse him, and he looks at them in anger and he says, which one of you, even on the Sabbath, would help his servant or even his animal that was in distress? Of course you would do that, even on the Sabbath. So he turns to the man with the withered arm, and he says, in front of them all, he says, stretch out your hand. And the man's hand is restored like that. He heals the man miraculously in front of all the religious people on the Sabbath in the synagogue. And it says after that, they went out and plotted how to kill him. Because they're saying he broke the law. He broke God's law. He deserves to die. Our question is Jesus breaking the law when he heals the man on Sabbath? Is he breaking the law because he's the Son of God and he has the authority, he can do whatever he wants? Far from it. He's demonstrating for us and for all generation of believers, what is the spirit of that law? What does God want from that law? What was the reason for that law? What's the purpose? That's the spirit of the law. And so he says, why did God command us to rest? Obviously, the purpose of God's command for us to rest is so that we'd be restored, refreshed, strengthened, and healed enough to go about his business the following day. What better day to heal someone? It's not breaking the law, it's perfecting the law. You see, he's taking that law to its perfect level. He's saying this is what Sabbath is all about. It's about being refreshed, being made whole. Later, the writer to the Hebrews will write to us and say, you enter this Sabbath by faith, when you trust God enough to relax for a moment. Some of us really need this revelation. We're driven by our anxieties. We're driven by our responsibilities. We're driven by a sense of guilt that if I don't do this, I'm deficient. I've fallen short of God's command. We don't trust him to take care of our business enough that when we come to him, we say, Lord, I'm going to put you first, and I'm going to trust in you, and that means you really are going to take care of me. You're going to take care of my family. You're going to take care of my business. And when that truth, that real truth gets revealed in our hearts, maybe for the first time in our lives, there comes an inner shalom, an inner peace. And you can really go, God is real. I'm okay. I'm going to be okay tomorrow. Not because of me. Not because I'm going to do everything right, but because of him. When you have that realization and it becomes reality to you, you're entering the Sabbath. That's the spirit of Sabbath. It's a spirit of God taking the burden off of you. So that when he tells you to do something, you're ready, you're strong, you're able, you're full of energy, you're refreshed, you're healed. Okay? Friends, we need to understand the spirit of God's laws, and we need it across the board. Why is this so important to us? It's important because without law, there is no authority. But we need the law of the Spirit, not the letter, because the letter will kill you, but the Spirit will set you free. But you can't do without law. You won't have authority to change anything in your nation unless someone amongst you understands law. Right now, you may have complaints. You may be complaining that the laws are not just. Okay, so where are the people among you who understand the justice of God and have the gifting and the calling to change those laws? You know, there's a doctrine that's going out into the church, and I think it's it will weaken us rather than make us strong, and that is you don't need law at all. Law is condemnation. Law is guilt. Forget about law because now we're under grace. Friends, listen. If you throw out law, you throw out your authority to make change. What you want is His law, not the law of man. Let me give you some examples about how important this is to us. Let's say you're traveling and you're in a foreign country and you start to feel sick. You know, you're in your hotel, you're miles away from home, and not only do you feel sick, what you feel like is like you feel like someone heavy is sitting on your chest. And it doesn't get better as the minutes go by, it gets worse. And then the upper part of your body starts to feel numb. And so immediately you go to your computer and you look up WebMD. And you type in your symptoms, and WebMD comes back and tells you, these are the symptoms of a heart attack, okay? And you go, whoa. And now it's really severe, okay? So what do? You get down to the lobby, you get them to call you a taxi, they take you to the nearest hospital. Thank God there's one close by. You go into the emergency room, and you explain to the nurse on duty what you're experiencing. And she says, yep, you know what? You're right. These is clearly sounds like the symptoms of an early heart attack. And good news. I have good news and bad news. Good news is that we have an expert cardiologist on our staff. Bad news, he's on break right now. However, don't look so worried. Don't look so worried. Because one of the cooks in our cafeteria just happens to be on break right now. I mean, amazing, isn't it? Just right in this time frame, one of our cooks is on break, and we just checked, and that cook says he'd be glad to come up and examine you and try to tell you what's wrong. Okay, so now you're there, and you have a choice to make. What do you want, the cook or the cardiologist? Okay, I think the choice is obvious, okay? You'll wait for the cardiologist. No matter how bad you feel, few minutes, you want the heart doctor. Okay, why? What's the difference between the cook and the cardiologist? Well, about 10 years of study, maybe more, plus some years of internship and practice and medical examinations and more practice and experience. There's a big difference between the cook and the cardiologist. Okay, so what is that heart doctor doing in those 10 years of intense, difficult study? Well, he or she is studying and learning all the thousands and thousands of laws that govern the functioning of the human body, and particularly the cardiovascular system. And thank God that they are laws, because once you learn them, how they work on one person, they work very similarly on someone else. Right? That's the difference between the cook and the cardiologist. And so the medical professionals who take the time and the effort and make the investment of resources to learn those thousands of laws and master them, they provide us with freedom to live healthier lives. Don't tell me that learning laws is all about bondage and condemnation. I want the cardiologist. You can choose the cook. One time, years ago, I was serving in business in a company. I was in marketing, and my job was going to different cities and giving presentations and basically explaining and selling technology. And one time I had to give a presentation in Hamburg, so I flew into Frankfurt, because that's where the big international airport is, and I met with the general manager of our subsidiary there, and he was going to take me to the exhibition in Hamburg. But he was new on the job, and he had just taken ownership of the new company car. That was part of his package. And so he was now the proud driver of a BMW like 700 series. This was some years ago, but it was a really fine automobile. And he was so proud of it, he said to me, hey, listen, we have to be in Hamburg in a certain number of hours tomorrow. Actually, it was the next morning. He says, no need to fly, we'll drive. So we got into his car, and I'm in the passenger, the co-pilot seat, and we strap on our seat belts. He gets out on the Autobahn, and in Germany, in some sections of this Autobahn, this national highway system, they have no speed limit. And you just go as fast as you possibly can, okay? So he gets this car out on the Autobahn and floors it. And this automobile took off like a rocket, okay? I'm being pushed back into the cushions of the seat, and we're just flying along. And while this is going on, I'm glancing just casually, just glancing casually at the speedometer, trying to appear like, this is something I do every day. And I'm watching, out of the corner of my eye, I'm watching the needle, go up like this. It's like 100, 120, 160, 180, 200, 220. All right, so he levels off at 220. All right, so now he's cruising the fast lane of the Autobahn, 220 kilometers an hour, and I'm watching this, and the car is like a low-flying airplane. Okay, I'm watching this out of the corner of my eye, and I'm thinking, in my country, the highest legal speed limit is 110. This man is now driving twice what I think is fast. Okay. All right, so we cruise at 220. I mean, the cars and the trucks are approaching backwards like this, So obviously, we make it to Hamburg in record time. Come into our hotel, and sit down to have dinner. And so this German gentleman, he turns to me and says, well, Peter, tell me about yourself. So I said, I'm a Christian. And he says, oh, you're a Christian. You have to believe in all of these things. I don't believe in. I don't need any of that. I believe that everything is relative. Okay. So I was thinking, you may say that because you may want to live as if everything was relative, morally, a world without moral rules or guidelines. You may say that because you want to live that way, but you don't drive that way. You should be thankful that there are some engineers at BMW who took the time to learn the laws of engineering and put that car together. You should be thankful that there's somebody at BMW that knows the difference between 8 millimeters and 12, or else we wouldn't be sitting here at dinner, all right? You think of the intense study that goes into the design of that kind of technology, the years mechanical and automotive engineers take to learn all the rules of engineering so they can create an automobile like that. Forget about the fuel. When it comes to the fuel, we're talking about chemical engineering and now thousands of other rules that produce just the fuel for that. All right, one last story. One time I was in an airport, and I'm desperate for something to read. I've got a long flight ahead of me. So I'm cruising through, the bookstores, W.H. Smith, whatever, Relay, there's all these stores, and I find this book on the shelf of one of the bookstores, and I thought, this book, it might be interesting. And it was a little paperback book written by a British author, and the title of it was The 12 Books That Changed the World. And I thought, now that might be interesting. I'd really be interested to know what this author thinks are the 12 most important books in the world. So I buy the paperback, and I start to read it on the plane, and sure enough, it starts out with all the typical stuff, the Bible, okay? Canterbury Tales. I mean, the guy was British. What do you expect? Canterbury Tales, and so on, okay? But just about the time when I'm ready to, go to sleep or something, I get to this place in the middle of the book, and there's this one book that he thinks was one of the 12 most important books ever written. And I thought, now this is very interesting, and I'll tell you what it was. He thought that one of those books was called The Rule Book of Association Football. Okay? The Rule Book of Association Football, because about 100 years ago, some British university students sat around in a pub and they wrote down the rules of the game that became football, or Americans would call it soccer. All right, and as I read about that, it really struck me. I thought, that's kind of amazing, because I know that when the World Cup is taking place, the majority of humans on planet Earth either watch it or participate in that game in some way. Okay, so now we're not talking about millions of people. We're not talking about hundreds of millions of people. We're talking about billions of people somehow enjoy this beautiful game, right? And at that point, I realized, what creates the game of soccer? The rules. The rules. If you change one rule of that game, one rule, I mean, they're debating about like goal line cameras now or something like that, right? If you change one rule of that game, you change the entire game for billions of people. The rules of soccer create a game that provides billions of people with intense enjoyment. I mean, sometimes too intense. Don't tell me that rules bring bondage. Rules, the laws of God, are meant to protect you and to protect your family and to protect your investment. The rules, the biblical writer James talks about the perfect law, the law of liberty. That rule book of association football gave me an insight into what is meant by the law of liberty. When the laws are right, people are free, and they're protected, and their investments are protected by law. That's the role of law, and that's why God rules lawfully. That's why we need to go back and understand God's laws, not to apply them in a legalistic way, because yes, legalistically, those laws will condemn you and they'll kill you. They'll just squeeze the life right out of you. It's easy to become a Pharisee. But if we interpret those laws in the Spirit, if we let Jesus show us what is the spirit of those laws, we can have the lawfulness of God and the freedom of the Spirit. And this is the teaching of the Apostle Paul. Friends, you need that because our authority in God's kingdom comes through the lawful rulership of the Lord. And if you're going to lead this nation, someone better have a revelation of the lawfulness of God. And some gifted people, and this is why I'm talking to you about, some people are gifted in law, just like I have friends who are gifted in accounting. Some people gifted in law. Some people are called to be lawyers. Some are called to be judges. Some are called, yes, even to politics. They have that special gifting in politics. You need to find those people. You need to equip those people. You need to disciple those people. And you need to send those people out to advance the kingdom. You need someone, or someone's among you, who can read the laws of God. Because, you see, in Israel, you have the nation that God himself discipled. He took them from dysfunctional status to the greatest nation in the world under Solomon. Everything he told them, he said, I'll make you the head and not the tail. I know you're dysfunctional. I know it doesn't, your society doesn't work. But if you do what I say, I'll make you a great nation. I'll raise you up above the others. I'll make you the example of through all time. And that's exactly what he did. He himself discipled the nation of Israel and put it in our Bibles as an example. This is the kingdom of God. And then when Jesus came along, he trained up his disciples, and then he sent them out. He said, guys, listen, it's not just Israel anymore. Now it's Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth, even Malaysia. Even Malaysia. And he said, all authority, all power has been given to me. So now you go and make disciples of all the nations, not just the individuals. Don't just fill the churches. It's not about attendance numbers on Sundays. It's about discipling a nation. God did it with Israel. That's why Israel is in the Bible. Not out of favoritism, not because Israel is superior, not because Israel is better, simply because of the sovereign choice of God. Like I said, he didn't choose Japan, and I'm still really kind of angry about that. Listen, if it was Japan, we'd get everybody the same. Don't worry. We understand process. We'd raise the quality. Don't worry. So I want to stir you up with this. That this is when you have the breakthrough, this is the next day. When the game changes, and you can stand as equals in this nation or any nation, that's the day when the responsibility now is on your shoulders. What would you do? How would you decide? How would you rule? You need to be praying about this now. And the person to teach you is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, okay? The greatest ruler who ever lived. The perfect ruler, the lawful one, the one whose kingdom will have no end, the one who establishes a kingdom that will never be shaken. And it's not just to be spiritualized. The kingdom comes in power to change our lives, to change the world around us, revival that reforms, an awakening that transforms. God discipled a nation, and so can you. And I believe that's why there's going to be a breakthrough. And when that breakthrough comes, I don't say if, I say when, you're going to need people who are gifted in every area of society to step out at that point and bring the kingdom as salt and light into every corner of their world. And God is going to say, you're going to be the head and not the tail. So how are you going to decide when you're the head? Right? You better try to answer that question now. Lord, how are we going to be the head? If you take us from being the tail and you make us the head, how can we make good decisions? How can we be like Esther and Mordecai, who got together, who brought their gifting together and changed their whole environment, changed their culture, changed their history by using their gifts and their calling? Even in corrupt Shushan, they rose to the top. How about Daniel? Same thing. Daniel in Babylon, God raised him and made him the head and not the tail. How about Joseph in Egypt? Idolatrous, corrupt Egypt. Joseph rises to the top because he was prepared by God, ready to make the right decisions for all the Egyptians. He saved the nation. He didn't just save his family, he saved the nation. Pharaoh honored him like a father. I believe this is the destiny of the people of God, something that God deeply desires to see in his body. It comes from his lawful, his righteous rulership. He said, seek first my kingdom and my righteousness, and everything else you need will be added to you. I'd like to ask you to pray with me. It's been really a pleasure teaching you today. I've just really enjoyed it so much. Let's pray, and let's honor the Lord who's brought us together for his purposes, shall we? I'm going to ask you if you'll just stand up. You've been sitting a long time. Stand up, and let's just open our hearts to the Lord. You know, truth in the kingdom is real truth in the kingdom. Truth that remains with us and changes us is more caught than taught. And you know, sometimes it's just a phrase or a word or something else that you catch in a session like this. I'm going to pray that what God wants you to catch, you'll catch and keep. And that it will be like a seed of truth that gets planted in your heart, puts down its roots into your character, and because of the grace of God, and because of His love towards us, that seed will be protected from the wiles of Satan, who wants to pick it away and take it from you, and it will grow up and bear fruit. My prayer for you is that the seeds of truth that the Lord has put in your hearts already through His scriptures and through His Spirit, that they won't be like the seeds that were found among the thorns, where the worries and the cares and the pressures of life grew up and choked it out and kept it from being fruitful. I'm going to pray that it won't be like the seeds that fell on rocky ground that sprung up with enthusiasm, but that when difficulties and hardships and challenges came up, they withered away because they didn't have root. I'm going to pray that the seeds of truth that God puts in your life will go into deep, fertile ground in your heart and life, and they'll be kept there until just the right time when they're going to begin to grow, because the roots are there and they're going to begin to put forth fruit. I'm going to pray that your Christian movement in your churches and in this nation will get connected to the root of Israel, and the sap and the nourishment will begin to flow, and the authority will flow in, and the calling and the gifting will begin to burst out, that there'll be much fruit in your movement. You'll produce all